I found my uncle's letter wedged between the pages of a water-damaged HOA rulebook, and the first thing I noticed was the wax seal, like he thought he was leaving me a treasure map instead of what turned out to be a legal time bomb that would blow up Meadowbrook Glen's entire power structure. My uncle Logan Kramer had died 3 weeks earlier at 78, and I had inherited his townhouse in Phoenix, Arizona, a place I'd visited maybe twice in my life. The funeral was small, the estate simple, or so I thought, until his attorney, a tired-looking woman named Patricia Chen, handed me that rulebook with a knowing smile that should have been my first warning. The letter explained everything in Gerald's cramped handwriting. He owned not one property in Meadowbrook Glen, but 4, purchased strategically over 15 years through various LLCs that the HOA board had never properly tracked. Each property came with 1 voting share, and according to the bylaws written back in 1987 when the development was built, those votes were fully transferable to heirs. I'm Logan Kramer, 32 years old, and up until that moment, I worked as a project manager for a tech startup in Seattle. I knew absolutely nothing about HOA politics, except that my friends complained about them at dinner parties. Now, I was staring at documents that showed me I controlled 4 out of 7 board votes in a community of 260 homes. The current board, according to Gerald's meticulous notes, had been running Meadowbrook Glen like their personal fiefdom for the past 8 years. The president was a woman named Brenda Morrison, 54, who Gerald described as the kind of person who measures her neighbor's grass with a ruler and calls it community service. Her right hand was Sharon Whitley, the vice president, and together they'd been systematically increasing fees, handing out fines for invisible infractions, and awarding maintenance contracts to Sharon's husband's company at rates that made highway robbery look reasonable. Gerald's letter was clear about his intentions. He'd been gathering evidence, building his case, waiting for the right moment to strike. But cancer got him first. Now it was up to me. I sat in Gerald's townhouse that first night, surrounded by boxes of documents, reading through years of financial records that he'd somehow obtained. The HOA had raised fees by 48% over 5 years while doing half the promised maintenance. They'd created a reserve fund that seemed to disappear into vague administrative costs. They'd placed liens on 3 properties owned by elderly residents who'd been late on payments during medical emergencies, forcing sales that benefited, surprise, surprise, investors connected to board members. The next board meeting was in 11 days. I had that long to understand what I'd inherited and decide what to do with it. I spent the first week interviewing neighbors. My uncle had been quiet about his plans, but he'd been friendly enough that people opened up to me when I mentioned his name. An older gentleman named Robert Hutchins, who lived 2 doors down, actually teared up when I knocked on his door. Gerald was a good man, Robert said, inviting me into a living room that smelled like coffee and old books. He helped my wife and me when the board tried to fine us for having our grandson's car parked in our driveway for more than 48 hours. The kid was visiting from college for a week. They wanted $200. Did you pay it? We had to. They threatened a lien. Gerald paid it for us anonymously, but I figured out it was him. He told me to keep quiet, said he was working on something bigger. I heard variations of that story all week. A young mother named Diana who got fined for having a tricycle visible from the street. A veteran named Marcus whose American flag was deemed too large, according to a rule that didn't exist in the original bylaws. A couple in their 70s who'd been told their desert landscaping violated aesthetic guidelines, forcing them to install expensive grass that required constant watering in the Arizona heat, all while the board preached water conservation. By day 8, I wasn't just angry. I was furious. These people weren't maintaining a community. They were running a protection racket with clipboards and passive-aggressive newsletters. I called Patricia Chen to confirm my understanding of the voting structure. She laid it out in terms even I couldn't misunderstand. The board had 7 voting members. 5 positions were elected by the general community every 3 years on a rotating basis. 2 positions, president and vice president, were elected by the board members themselves from among the 7. But here was the beautiful part that Gerald had discovered buried in the original bylaws. Property owners could hold multiple board positions simultaneously if they owned multiple properties. The board had changed the rules in 2011 to prevent this, but they'd never properly voted on the amendment according to the required procedures. Gerald had documentation proving the vote was invalid. "So I can claim all 4 seats?" I asked. "You already hold all 4 seats," Patricia corrected. "Your uncle held them. They just didn't know it. He never attended meetings, always submitted proxy votes through different names representing his various LLCs. The board thought they were dealing with 4 separate owners who never showed up in person." "And the other 3 board members?" "Brenda Morrison, Sharon Whitley, and a man named Todd Stevenson. Todd's been trying to vote against Brenda and Sharon for 2 years, but he's always outvoted 4-3. He has no idea those 4 votes belong to one person or that you now control them." I smiled for the first time since reading Gerald's letter. "What happens if I show up to the meeting?" "You request recognition as the rightful holder of your inherited board positions, provide the death certificate and transfer of property documents, and assume your seats. Then you can call for votes on anything you want. With 4 votes, you can pass any measure, remove any officer, amend any rule, or dissolve the board entirely if you want to follow the proper procedures." "Will they try to fight it?" "Brenda Morrison has an attorney on retainer, but your claim is ironclad. The bigger question is what you plan to do once you establish control." I'd been thinking about that all week, lying awake in Gerald's guest bed, listening to the desert wind. I could make them suffer the way they'd made everyone else suffer. I could find them, remove them, humiliate them in front of the community. But that wasn't what Gerald wanted, and despite never really knowing him, I felt like I owed it to him to do this right. "I'm going to fix the community," I said, "and then I'm going to make sure this never happens again." The meeting was held in the community clubhouse, a building that badly needed the renovations the increased HOA fees were supposedly funding. I arrived 20 minutes early with a briefcase containing every document I needed, organized in folders color-coded by Patricia's paralegal. The room was set up with a long table at the front for the board members and rows of folding chairs facing them. About 30 residents were already seated, the usual attendees according to Robert, who texted me that morning with encouragement. Brenda Morrison arrived exactly 5 minutes before the meeting start time. She was tall, thin, with blonde hair cut in that specific style that screamed, "I demand to speak to managers professionally." Sharon Whitley came in right behind her, shorter, rounder, with the pinched expression of someone who'd spent years looking for things to criticize. Todd Stevenson was younger than I expected, maybe 40, wearing a golf shirt and looking like he'd rather be anywhere else. They took their seats at the table, Brenda in the center, and she banged a gavel that seemed unnecessary given the small crowd. Her eyes swept the room and landed on me. I saw the moment of confusion, the quick glance at her papers, checking if she'd missed some note about a new resident. "Good evening, everyone," Brenda began, her voice carrying that artificial warmth that customer service representatives use. "Welcome to the monthly board meeting of the Meadowbrook Glen Homeowners Association. We have several items on tonight's agenda, including final approval of the new landscaping contract and discussion of proposed amendments to our parking regulations." I raised my hand. Brenda's eyes narrowed slightly, but she maintained her smile. "Yes, can we help you?" "Logan Kramer," I said, standing up. "I'm Gerald Kramer's nephew and heir. I'd like to address the board regarding my inherited properties and voting rights." The smile froze on Brenda's face. "I'm sorry for your loss, Mr. Kramer, but this isn't the time for property transfer discussions. You can contact our management company tomorrow during business hours to update the ownership records." "I'm not here to update records," I said, walking toward the front table with my briefcase. "I'm here to claim my seats on this board." "Your seat," Brenda corrected, her voice developing an edge. "Each property owner gets 1 vote in community matters, and you'll be welcome to participate in elections just like everyone else." "Actually," I said, placing my briefcase on the table and opening it, "I'm here to claim 4 seats. As the inherited owner of 4 properties within Meadowbrook Glen, each purchased with full voting rights as outlined in the original 1987 bylaws, I hold 4 board positions currently listed under various LLC names." I watched the color drain from Brenda's face in real time. It was fascinating, like watching someone realize they'd been playing poker with marked cards and just discovered everyone could see them. Sharon Whitley grabbed Brenda's arm, whispering frantically. Todd Stevenson sat up straighter, suddenly very interested. That's impossible, Brenda said. We don't allow multiple board positions. The rules were changed in 2011. I pulled out the first folder, green tab, and slid it across the table. The rules were allegedly changed in 2011, but the amendment never received the required two-thirds majority vote of the full community as specified in Article 7, Section 3 of the original bylaws. The vote that occurred was a simple majority of board members, which doesn't constitute a valid amendment to the founding documents. My attorney has reviewed the meeting minutes from that year. The amendment is invalid, and the original bylaws remain in effect. Brenda snatched the folder, flipping through pages, her hands shaking slightly. Sharon was reading over her shoulder, her pinched face getting even tighter. "This is ridiculous," Sharon said. "You can't just walk in here and claim you control the board." "I'm not claiming it," I said calmly. "I'm stating it as fact. I have the property deeds, the death certificate, the transfer documents, and documentation of my uncle's ownership of these voting positions for the past 15 years. Everything is in order. Patricia Chen, my attorney, has verified all of this and is available by phone if you need legal confirmation." Todd Stevenson actually laughed, a short bark of surprised joy. "Are you serious right now?" "Completely serious," I said, pulling out 3 more folders and distributing them to each board member. "These contain copies of all relevant documents. As you can see, I'm the legal owner and operator of Desert Mountain Properties, LLC, Copper Sky Investments, LLC, Phoenix Valley Holdings, LLC, and Roadrunner Real Estate, LLC. Each entity owns one property in Meadowbrook Glen, purchased between 2009 and 2018. Each purchase included full HOA voting rights. My uncle attended meetings by proxy using different representatives for each LLC, which is why the board never realized one person controlled all 4 votes. The room behind me had gone completely silent. I could feel 30 pairs of eyes boring into the back of my head, watching this unfold. Brenda's face had gone from white to red. "We need to consult with our attorney." "Of course," I said. "But until my claim is legally challenged and overturned, I hold these 4 positions. Under the bylaws, board business can continue with all members present or be tabled until the next meeting. I'm present and ready to conduct business. What would you like to do?" It was a power play, and we all knew it. If Brenda insisted on tabling everything, she'd look weak in front of the community. If she continued, she'd have to do so, knowing I could outvote her on anything. She looked at Sharon, who shook her head slightly, then at their papers as if they might contain some escape route. "Fine," Brenda said tightly. "We'll note your claim in the meeting minutes and continue with tonight's agenda. But I want to be clear that we're not accepting this without verification." "Verification is welcome," I said. I didn't return to my seat in the audience. Instead, I walked to the side of the room where several empty chairs lined the wall. "I'll observe from here until my position is confirmed." Todd Stevenson grinned at me. He'd clearly figured out what this meant. With 4 votes on my side, he was no longer the permanent minority. The power dynamic had just flipped completely. Brenda tried to regain control of the meeting, returning to her agenda with forced confidence. The first item was approval of a new landscaping contract with Desert Bloom Services for 3 years at $160,000 annually. "All in favor?" Brenda said quickly, raising her hand. Sharon's hand shot up immediately. "Opposed?" I said from my chair. Brenda glared at me. "You don't have a vote until your claim is verified." "Then this vote should be tabled until verification is complete," I said. "You can't have it both ways. Either I'm a board member now and can vote, or we table all business until my status is confirmed." Todd Stevenson actually applauded once, slowly. "He's right, Brenda. Those are the options." Brenda looked like she wanted to throw her gavel at me. "We table the landscaping contract vote pending verification of Mr. Kramer's status." "Second item," Sharon jumped in, trying to move things along. "We need to discuss the parking violations from this month. We have 17 residents who violated the 48-hour visitor parking rule, each subject to a $200 fine." A woman in the audience, maybe mid-30s, stood up. "That's insane. My sister was visiting with her kids. Are you seriously going to fine me because she stayed 3 days?" "Rules are rules," Sharon said in a tone that probably made her children hate visiting home. "If we make exceptions, everyone will want one." I move to table discussion of parking fines until my status is verified, I called out, since I may have voting power over such decisions. Brenda slammed her gavel down. You can't just table everything. Why not? You're questioning my authority to vote. Logically, that questions my authority regarding any decision made here tonight, unless you'd like to confirm that I do have voting power and can participate. It was beautiful, watching her trapped between options she hated. If she confirmed my voting rights to move the meeting forward, I could immediately start voting against her. If she didn't, I could table everything by pointing out the uncertainty. She'd built her power on bureaucracy and rules, and now those same structures were collapsing around her. I move to adjourn this meeting, Brenda said suddenly. We clearly need time to review Mr. Kramer's claims with our attorney before proceeding. Second, Sharon said immediately. All in favor, Brenda said. 3 hands went up, Brenda, Sharon, and the 2 proxies for absent board members that Sharon was somehow holding. Wait, that wasn't right. I stood up. Excuse me, who are those proxy votes for? Sharon looked flustered. 2 board members couldn't attend tonight, so they submitted proxies. To you specifically? Can I see the documentation? We don't need to show you anything, Brenda snapped. Todd Stevenson held out his hand. Actually, Brenda, proxy votes do need to be documented and available for review. That's in the bylaws you love to quote so much. Sharon, who are you holding proxies for? Sharon's face went red. I don't have them with me. So you're voting on behalf of Ghost Board members? I said. How many people are actually on this board? The audience was murmuring now, people turning to each other, confusion spreading. Todd was looking at Brenda and Sharon with dawning suspicion. There are 7 board positions, Brenda said defensively. 2 are currently vacant, but we've been maintaining their votes through proxies from previous board members. That's not legal, I said. You can't vote on behalf of vacant positions. A vacant seat doesn't vote. The bylaws are clear about that. Our attorney approved this arrangement, Sharon insisted. Then your attorney is wrong, or you're lying about what they approved. Show me the documentation. Brenda stood up, gathering her papers. This meeting is out of order. We're adjourning. You need a valid vote to adjourn, Todd Stevenson said, also standing. And I'm voting no. Without those fake proxy votes, you don't have a majority. The room erupted. People were standing, talking over each other, some shouting questions at Brenda and Sharon. I stayed calm, letting it happen. This was better than anything I could have orchestrated. The board's corruption was exposing itself. Robert Hutchins stood up, his voice cutting through the noise. I want a full audit of the HOA finances right now, before this board spends another dollar of our money. I second that, said Marcus, the veteran I'd talked to earlier. You can't call for an audit, Sharon yelled. You're not board members. Actually, I said, pulling out my phone and opening the photos I'd prepared, according to the bylaws, any group of residents representing 15% of the properties can petition for a financial audit by an independent firm. That's 39 households. Robert, if you start a petition, I think you'll get signatures tonight. Consider it started, Robert said, pulling out his phone. Brenda was panicking now. I could see it in her eyes, the realization that she'd lost control not just of the meeting, but of the entire situation. She grabbed Sharon's arm and headed for the door. We're leaving. This meeting is over. The meeting isn't over until we vote to adjourn, Todd called after them. If you leave, we have a quorum with 3 board members present, assuming Logan's claims are valid. Brenda stopped at the door, turned around, and played her last card. If you proceed with any official business tonight, I'll have our attorney sue every single person involved. You'll spend years in court. Empty threats, I said. But fine. We'll adjourn for tonight. But I'll be requesting an emergency meeting within the next week to confirm my board positions and vote on immediate measures, including that financial audit. Check your bylaws. Any board member can call an emergency meeting with 48 hours' notice. Brenda and Sharon left without another word. Todd Stevenson walked over to me, hand extended. Todd Stevenson. I've been waiting 2 years for someone to challenge those 2. Your uncle mentioned once that he was working on something, but I never imagined this. We shook hands. Logan Kramer. And yeah, Gerald was apparently planning this for a long time. I'm just finishing what he started. What do you need from me? Help me understand the full scope of what they've been doing. I have documents, but I need someone who's been on the inside. Todd nodded. Come by my place tomorrow morning. I've got my own files. Things I documented but could never act on because I was always outvoted. With your 4 votes, we can actually fix this place." The residents mobbed me for the next 30 minutes, asking questions, sharing their own stories about the board's abuses. I listened to all of them, took notes, promised that things would change. By the time I got back to Gerald's townhouse, it was nearly 11, and I was exhausted but energized in a way I hadn't felt in years. My phone rang at 7 the next morning. Patricia Chen. "You made quite an impression last night," she said. "I got a call an hour ago from Stephen Bartlett, the HOA's attorney. He wants to meet with me to discuss your claims." And I told him we're happy to meet, but that my review of your claims shows they're completely valid. He knows that. He's just doing due diligence for his clients. The real question is what happens when Brenda Morrison realizes she can't win this legally and decides to fight dirty. "What do you mean?" "I mean that people who've had power for 8 years don't give it up easily. She's going to look for any leverage she can find against you. Make sure your life is clean, Logan. No skeletons in closets, no debts, no arrests, nothing she can use to discredit you." I thought about that. I'd been divorced 2 years ago, amicably enough. No kids, no criminal record. My credit was fine. I couldn't think of anything that would matter to an HOA fight, but Patricia's warning stayed with me. I met Todd at his townhouse at 9. His place was immaculate, the kind of clean that suggested either no personal life or obsessive organization. He led me to a home office where he had filing cabinets full of documents. "I've been documenting everything for 3 years, Todd said, pulling out folders. Financial discrepancies, contract awards to connected companies, fine disparities based on whether the board liked you or not. I'm a forensic accountant by trade, so I know what I'm looking at. This HOA is hemorrhaging money through corruption." He spread documents across his desk. Sharon Whitley's husband, Dan, owned a company called Whitley Property Services. Over the past 5 years, they'd received over $900,000 in contracts for landscape maintenance, pool cleaning, and general repairs. Todd had compared their rates to market standards. They were charging 30 to 40% above normal rates. "And look at this," Todd said, showing me another set of papers. 3 years ago, the HOA took out a loan for $200,000 to renovate the community pool and clubhouse. According to the minutes, the renovations happened. According to the actual work done, they patched some cracks and painted, maybe $40,000 in real work. Where did the other $160,000 go? "Administrative costs," I said sarcastically. "Exactly what the budget says. But administrative costs shouldn't eat up 80% of a renovation loan. That money went somewhere, and I'd bet anything it went into accounts connected to Brenda and Sharon." I took photos of everything with my phone, uploading them to a secure cloud drive. This was beyond HOA politics now. If Todd was right, this was fraud, possibly embezzlement, criminal charges territory. "How did they get away with this for so long?" Todd sighed. "Because most people don't come to meetings. They pay their HOA fees, follow the rules, and assume the board is acting in good faith. The few people who asked questions got buried in fines and harassment until they either left or shut up. Your uncle was smart enough to stay quiet while gathering evidence. I wish I'd done the same instead of fighting openly. They made my life hell for 2 years. "That ends now," I said. "Can you put together a full financial report showing all the discrepancies? Something we can hand to auditors and, if necessary, law enforcement." "I've been working on exactly that for 6 months. I can have it ready in 2 days. We spent the next 3 hours going through everything. By the time I left, I had a clear picture of the corruption. Brenda and Sharon had treated the HOA like their personal bank account, siphoning money through inflated contracts, fake administrative fees, and loans that were never used for their stated purposes. The total amount involved was probably over $1 million spread across 8 years. That evening, I drafted the notice for an emergency board meeting, scheduled for 3 days out. Patricia reviewed it and sent it via email and certified mail to every board member. The agenda was simple: confirm Logan Kramer's board positions and voting rights, and vote on initiating a comprehensive financial audit by an independent forensic accounting firm. Brenda's response came within an hour, a furious email claiming I had no authority to call meetings and that any business conducted would be invalid. I forwarded it to Patricia, who sent back a measured legal response citing the exact bylaw provisions that gave me that authority. The next 2 days were chaotic. Robert's petition for a financial audit gathered over 70 signatures, nearly triple what was needed. Several residents started their own digging into the board's history and found more irregularities. Someone discovered that Brenda had placed a lien on an elderly woman's property for unpaid fines, but then arranged for the property to be sold to an investor at below market value. The investor was Brenda's sister. The story started spreading beyond Meadowbrook Glen. A local reporter from the Arizona Republic somehow got wind of it and called me for a comment. I declined, but confirmed that there would be a meeting to address concerns about HOA management. The reporter showed up at the meeting. This time, the clubhouse was packed. Every chair was filled. People lined the walls, and at least 50 residents crowded around the doorways. The fire marshal would probably have shut us down if he'd known. Brenda, Sharon, and Todd were at the front table. I arrived with Patricia Chen, who carried a briefcase that looked substantial enough to contain federal charges. "This meeting is called to order," I said, taking a seat at the table without waiting for Brenda's permission. "The agenda is posted. First item, confirmation of my voting rights as the inherited owner of 4 properties with board representation." "I object," Brenda said immediately. "The board's attorney has advised us that your interpretation of the bylaws is questionable." "Then let's hear from the attorneys," I said. Patricia stood up, walking to the front. Patricia Chen, representing Logan Kramer. "I've reviewed the bylaws, the property records, the LLC documents, and the attempted 2011 amendment. My conclusion is that Mr. Kramer's claim is completely valid. The 2011 amendment was procedurally defective and never became effective. The original bylaws allow multiple board positions for multi-property owners. Mr. Kramer has provided all necessary documentation of his inheritance and property ownership. Unless there's a specific legal challenge beyond general objection, I'm prepared to argue this in court if necessary, but I'm confident Mr. Kramer would prevail." Brenda looked at Sharon, who was staring at her phone. "Our attorney can't make it tonight." "How convenient," someone in the audience called out. "Then we proceed," I said. "All in favor of confirming my voting rights." I raised my hand, 4 votes. Todd raised his hand. "That's 5 votes in favor. Opposed?" Brenda and Sharon raised their hands, 2 votes. "Motion carries. My voting rights are confirmed. Next item, authorization of a comprehensive financial audit by an independent forensic accounting firm." "I object," Brenda said again, but her voice had lost its strength. "This is a waste of HOA funds." "Actually," I said, "given the financial discrepancies that have been documented and the number of residents requesting this audit, it's a necessary measure to ensure transparency. I move that we hire Morrison and Associates, a forensic accounting firm based in Phoenix with experience in HOA audits, to conduct a complete review of Meadowbrook Glen finances for the past 8 years." "Second," Todd said immediately. "All in favor?" 5 votes again, mine and Todd's. "Opposed?" Brenda and Sharon. "Motion carries. Todd, can you handle contacting Morrison and Associates to begin the process?" "Happily," Todd said. Sharon stood up suddenly. "You're making a mistake. You don't know what you're doing." "I know exactly what I'm doing," I said. "I'm fulfilling my responsibility as a board member to ensure proper oversight of community finances. If the books are clean, the audit will show that, and everyone can move forward with confidence, unless you're worried about what an audit might find." Sharon didn't answer. She grabbed her purse and walked out, heels clicking on the floor. Brenda watched her go, then turned back to me. "You're going to regret this," Brenda said quietly. "Is that a threat?" "It's a prediction." She left too, and the room exploded into conversation. People were cheering, shaking my hand, thanking me. The reporter was taking notes frantically. Todd was grinning like he'd won the lottery, but I felt Patricia's hand on my arm, pulling me aside. "Be careful," she said. "Desperate people do desperate things." Sharon's threat sounded serious. "What can they do? The votes are done, the audit is authorized. They can destroy documents, move money, or come after you personally. Watch your back." I should have listened more carefully to that warning. The audit started 3 days later. Morrison and Associates sent 2 forensic accountants who set up in the HOA office and began requesting files. Todd worked with them, providing his documentation. The accountants looked grim by the end of the first day, which Todd said was a bad sign for Brenda and Sharon, but a good sign for our case. That night, someone broke into Gerald's townhouse while I was having dinner with Todd. They didn't take anything valuable. My laptop and phone were with me, but they ransacked the place, pulling files out of boxes, going through drawers. It was clearly a search, not a robbery. I called the police. The officer who responded was professional, but not particularly hopeful about finding who did it. No cameras in that part of the complex, no witnesses. He suggested I install a security system. I did that same night, cameras covering every entrance. 2 days later, someone filed a complaint with the Arizona Real Estate Department claiming I was illegally operating rental properties without proper licensing. The complaint was anonymous, but the timing was obvious. The department sent me a letter asking for documentation of my rental activities. Patricia responded with proof that the properties were owner-occupied through the LLCs and that no rental activity was occurring. The complaint was dismissed, but it took time and stress. Then, the online attacks started. Someone created a fake Facebook profile claiming to be me and posted aggressive messages about the HOA in local community groups. They made me sound like an unhinged lunatic threatening violence. I had to go through the process of reporting the fake account and proving my identity to group moderators. It was exhausting. "Classic harassment campaign," Patricia said when I told her. "They're trying to discredit you and make you give up. Don't." I wasn't planning to give up, but I'd be lying if I said the constant attacks weren't wearing me down. I was living in a townhouse that didn't feel like home, fighting battles I hadn't asked for, spending money on lawyers and security systems. My job in Seattle was getting impatient with my extended family emergency absence. My boss had been understanding at first, but 3 weeks was pushing it. Then the audit results came in, and everything else became irrelevant. Morrison and Associates delivered their report at a special board meeting 6 weeks after I'd first walked into that clubhouse. The community room was even more packed than before. News had spread about the harassment campaign, and residents were angry. Several people had come forward with their own stories of being harassed by Brenda and Sharon over the years. The Arizona Republic reporter was there again, and this time she'd brought a photographer. The lead accountant, a woman named Jennifer Morrison, no relation to Brenda, presented the findings. Her voice was professional, calm, devastating. Over the course of 8 years, Meadowbrook Glen HOA paid approximately $1.3 million to Whitley Property Services for various maintenance and repair contracts. Market analysis suggests these services should have cost approximately $700,000. The difference of $600,000 represents a potential overpayment, the room murmured. Jennifer continued. Jennifer. Additionally, the HOA took out 3 loans totaling $420,000 for various improvement projects. Documentation suggests actual work completed amounts to approximately $130,000. The remaining $290,000 is listed under administrative costs and miscellaneous expenses, but supporting documentation is insufficient or missing entirely. In total, Jennifer said, looking directly at Brenda, we've identified approximately $900,000 in questionable expenditures that lack proper documentation or represent significant overpayments to connected vendors. We've also identified several conflicts of interest that were not properly disclosed to the community, including the relationship between board member Sharon Whitley and the primary vendor, Whitley Property Services. Brenda's face was white again, but this time with something that looked like genuine fear. Sharon wasn't even there. She'd stopped coming to meetings after the audit started, claiming health issues. Based on these findings, Jennifer concluded, we recommend that the board consider referring this matter to law enforcement for investigation of potential fraud and embezzlement. The room exploded. People were shouting, some at Brenda, some at each other. I let it go for a minute, then banged the gavel. Order! We need order to proceed. The room quieted, barely. Thank you, Jennifer, for your thorough work. I move that we accept the audit report and forward it to the Phoenix Police Department's White-Collar Crime Division for investigation. Second, Todd said. All in favor? I raised my hand, 4 votes. Todd raised his. A woman named Linda Osborne, who'd been appointed to one of the vacant board seats the week before, raised hers. 6 votes. Opposed? Brenda slowly raised her hand, alone. Motion carries. Patricia, can you handle the referral to the police? I'll have it to them tomorrow morning. Brenda stood up. I'm resigning from the board, effective immediately. You can resign, I said, but that doesn't stop the investigation. If laws were broken, there will be consequences regardless of your current board status. She left without another word. The reporter chased her out, camera flashing. I knew this would be front-page news tomorrow, at least in the local section. The meeting continued for another hour, focused on practical matters. With Brenda and Sharon gone, we needed to rebuild the board's credibility and actually manage the community properly. We voted to terminate the contract with Whitley Property Services immediately and put out bids for legitimate vendors. We voted to freeze all non-essential spending until the legal matters were resolved. We voted to reduce monthly HOA fees by 20%, funded by cutting administrative costs to reasonable levels. Most importantly, we voted to amend the bylaws properly this time, with full community input. No more proxy votes for vacant positions, no more contracts awarded without competitive bidding, no more board members with financial interests in vendor companies, full financial transparency with quarterly reports published to all residents. It felt like cleaning a wound, painful, necessary, and ultimately healing. The police investigation took 3 months. Detectives interviewed dozens of residents, subpoenaed bank records, traced money flows. In the end, they built a solid case against both Brenda Morrison and Sharon Whitley for fraud, embezzlement, and exploitation of vulnerable adults. The last charge related to how they'd targeted elderly residents with fines and liens. Dan Whitley, Sharon's husband, was also charged as a co-conspirator for knowingly submitting inflated invoices. The arrest happened on a Tuesday morning. I wasn't there to see it, but Robert called me immediately after Brenda was led out of her townhouse in handcuffs. Sharon and Dan were arrested simultaneously at their home on the other side of Phoenix. The Arizona Republic ran a full feature story about the case, using Meadowbrook Glen as an example of HOA corruption. Other communities started coming forward with their own stories. The state legislature even started discussing new oversight requirements for HOA boards. Gerald's quiet investigation had sparked something bigger than either of us could have imagined. The criminal trial took 18 months from arrest to verdict. I attended as much as I could, though I'd moved back to Seattle after the initial investigation concluded. I'd hired a property management company to handle Gerald's townhouses, the honest kind that Todd helped me find. The rental income was decent, and I kept telling myself I'd sell them eventually. But something kept stopping me. Maybe it was knowing what Gerald had fought for. Maybe it was feeling connected to the community in a way I'd never expected. Or maybe it was just not wanting to let go of the last piece of my uncle's legacy. The trial itself was exactly as boring and procedural as you'd expect white-collar crime trials to be. Accountants testified about money flows, residents testified about harassment and excessive fines, bank records were entered into evidence. The defense attorneys tried to argue that everything was legitimate business expenses and interpretation of HOA rules, but the evidence was overwhelming. The jury deliberated for 6 hours. Guilty on all major counts for all 3 defendants. Sentencing happened 2 months later. Brenda Morrison got 4 years in federal prison and was ordered to pay restitution of $600,000. Sharon Whitley got 3.5 years with similar restitution. Dan Whitley got 2 years and lost his business license. All 3 were permanently banned from serving on any HOA board in Arizona. I was in the courtroom when the judge read the sentences. Brenda looked smaller somehow, diminished by the weight of consequences she'd probably never imagined facing. Sharon cried. Dan looked angry, but resigned. I didn't feel triumphant. I just felt tired and glad it was over. Outside the courthouse, the reporter who'd covered the story from the beginning asked me for a comment. I'm glad justice was served, I said. But the real victory is what's happening at Meadowbrook Glen now. The community is healing. People trust their HOA board again. Fees are lower, maintenance is better, and nobody's getting harassed for having a tricycle in their driveway. That's what my uncle wanted, and that's what matters. She asked if I planned to stay involved with the HOA. I'm staying on the board remotely for now, I said. We've modernized the rules to allow video attendance for owners who don't live on site. But the community has good people running things now, people who actually care about their neighbors instead of their own power. They don't need me to keep them honest. That was mostly true. Todd Stevenson had become board president and was doing an excellent job. Linda Osborne was vice president and proved to be even more detail-oriented than Todd. Robert Hutchins joined the board and focused on community events, turning Meadowbrook Glen into an actual community instead of just a collection of houses with shared expenses. I flew back to Phoenix one more time, 6 months after the sentencing, for a community celebration. The HOA had finally completed the pool and clubhouse renovations that the loan from years ago was supposedly for. This time, they'd done it right, with proper contractors and reasonable costs. The complex looked better than it probably ever had. They'd put up a small plaque near the clubhouse entrance. It read, "In memory of Logan Kramer, who believed communities thrive when governed with integrity." It was understated, which Gerald would have appreciated. No mention of the scandal, just a quiet acknowledgement of his principles. People came up to me all evening, shaking my hand, thanking me. The young mother whose tricycle had caused such trouble brought her daughter to meet me. The veteran showed me pictures of his new, properly sized flag flying without harassment. The elderly couple who'd been forced to replace their desert landscaping had switched back, and nobody said a word. But the person who affected me most was a woman I'd never met before. She was maybe 70, walked with a cane, and waited until late in the evening to approach me. "Mr. Kramer? I'm Dorothy Haynes. I sold my townhouse here 3 years ago because of the HOA board. They fined me constantly for things that weren't problems, made my life miserable. I couldn't afford to fight them. I just left. I'm sorry that happened to you," I said. "Don't be sorry. I just wanted to tell you that I heard what you did, how you stood up to them, and I want you to know it matters. People like me, who couldn't fight, we needed someone like you and your uncle. Thank you for being that person." She hugged me, and I found myself unexpectedly emotional. This had been about principles and laws and governance, but at its core, it was about people like Dorothy who just wanted to live peacefully in their homes without being bullied by petty tyrants with clipboards. I flew back to Seattle the next morning, but something had changed. I'd spent over a year dealing with HOA politics, legal battles, and small-time corruption, and somehow it had felt more meaningful than anything I'd done in my regular career. I'd helped people in a direct, tangible way. I'd exposed wrongdoing and seen actual justice served. I'd taken my uncle's legacy and turned it into something that mattered. 3 months later, I quit my job in Seattle. I sold my apartment, packed up my life, and moved to Phoenix permanently. I took over direct management of Gerald's properties and started a consulting business, helping other HOA communities identify and fix governance problems. Patricia Chen became my business partner, handling the legal side while I handled the investigation and community organizing. We called the business Kramer Community Advocates, and within 6 months we had more clients than we could handle. Apparently, HOA corruption was everywhere, and people were desperate for help navigating the complex web of bylaws, boards, and bad actors who'd learned to exploit the system. I never expected to become an HOA crusader. It wasn't a career path I'd ever imagined, but standing at Gerald's gravestone on the anniversary of his death, I finally understood what he'd been trying to teach me through his careful documentation and patient investigation. Communities matter. The rules that govern our shared spaces matter. The people we trust with authority over our homes matter. And sometimes, standing up to corruption isn't about grand gestures or dramatic confrontations. Sometimes it's about reading bylaws carefully, documenting evidence thoroughly, and showing up to meetings armed with nothing more than facts and determination. Gerald had taught me that power wielded selfishly will eventually collapse under its own weight, especially when someone patient enough to gather evidence and brave enough to act finally says enough. He'd given me not just properties and voting rights, but a purpose I'd been missing without knowing it. Looking back at the moment when Brenda Morrison's face went white in that first meeting, I realized now what I'd been seeing. It wasn't just fear of losing her board position or even fear of legal consequences. It was the recognition that her entire world, built on assumptions of unchallenged authority, was about to crumble. She'd spent 8 years believing nobody would stop her, that residents would stay intimidated, that documentation would stay buried, that the complexity of HOA governance would protect her from accountability. And then someone walked in with 4 votes, a briefcase full of evidence, and the absolute conviction that no community should be run like a fiefdom. My uncle had been planning that moment for 15 years. He'd positioned himself perfectly, documented everything meticulously, and waited for the right time. Cancer had stolen his chance to see it through, but he'd made sure someone could finish what he started. I just happened to be the one who inherited not just his properties, but his mission. And honestly, I wouldn't have wanted it any other way. The last time I drove through Meadowbrook Glen before moving to Phoenix permanently, I noticed something that made me smile. A kid's basketball hoop stood in a driveway, visible from the street. Under the old board, that would have been a fine, probably $200 for violating aesthetic guidelines. Now it was just a basketball hoop, exactly as it should be. Children were playing in the community pool without their parents, nervously watching for rule violations. Someone had planted bright red flowers in their front yard that definitely weren't on the approved landscaping list. The American flags were flying at every size, nobody measuring to ensure compliance with rules that never should have existed. It looked like a community where people actually lived, not a museum exhibit managed by petty authoritarians. That's what $900,000 in embezzlement and 3 people going to prison had bought us. The freedom to live normally in the homes we owned. It seemed like a fair trade to me. Years from now, when someone asks me what I do for a living, I'll probably say I help communities govern themselves better. It sounds simple, maybe even boring, but I'll know the truth behind those words, the stories of people liberated from harassment, the money recovered from corrupt officials, the bylaws rewritten to protect residents instead of board members. And I'll think about my Uncle Gerald, sitting in his townhouse, quietly buying properties through different LLCs, documenting every financial discrepancy, waiting patiently for the moment when his 4 votes would matter more than years of accumulated power. He'd taught me that sometimes inheritance isn't about money or property. Sometimes it's about responsibility, purpose, and the unfinished business of people who fought battles we didn't know were being waged. I inherited 4 votes on an HOA board. What I really inherited was a lesson in how power should be challenged, corruption should be exposed, and communities should be protected. And watching Brenda Morrison's face go white when I explained exactly how much control I'd just claimed over her kingdom? That was just the opening move in a game my uncle had been playing long before I knew the rules. Turns out I was a pretty quick learner. And Brenda, Sharon, and Dan learned something too, eventually, sitting in their respective prison cells. They learned that communities remember who protects them and who exploits them. They learned that bylaws can be weapons for good or ill. They learned that complicated systems designed to discourage accountability only work until someone patient and determined enough decides to actually read those systems and use them properly. Most importantly, they learned that authority without integrity is just tyranny in a blazer, and tyranny always eventually falls. My uncle knew that. He'd spent 15 years proving it, and when he couldn't finish the job himself, he'd made sure someone else could. I'm proud to have been that someone, proud to carry forward his legacy, proud to have turned a controlling vote on an HOA board into justice, accountability, and a community that finally remembered what it meant to govern with integrity instead of fear. That's the story of how I inherited power I didn't ask for and used it to tear down a corrupt system that had been exploiting people for nearly a decade. It's the story of my uncle's patient revolution and how sometimes the most powerful inheritance isn't money. It's the chance to finish what someone brave started and make sure their fight wasn't in vain. And it's the story of why I'll never look at an HOA board meeting the same way again. Because I know now what they can hide, what they can do to people, and exactly how satisfying it is to watch that power crumble when someone finally says no. Gerald Kramer said no with documentation, patience, and 4 strategically purchased properties. I just had to show up and deliver the message. Watching Brenda Morrison's face go white was just the beginning. Watching her get sentenced to federal prison was justice. But watching Meadowbrook Glen become an actual community again, where people felt safe and respected in their own homes, that was victory. The kind that lasts, the kind worth fighting for, the kind my uncle spent 15 years building toward, one property purchase and one documented violation at a time. I'm just glad I got to see it through. And even gladder that Gerald knew, somehow, that I would. That's family legacy. That's inherited responsibility. That's what it means to receive not just property, but purpose. And that's why a controlling vote on an HOA board turned out to be the most meaningful inheritance I could have possibly received.